This is the Northern Ireland.
Can I ask Assembly Broadcasting to keep all members in the spotlight for the next 4 items and give everyone a warm welcome to this meeting of the Education Committee. Agenda item 1 is apologies. We've received apologies from Robin Newton, who hopes to join us shortly. Any other apologies? No. Okay. Okay. Agenda item 2, then members, is chairperson's business. Could I seek members' agreement to amend the order of our agenda today to take the briefing from Eating Disorders Association Northern Ireland at approximately 9:45 and discuss our committee forward work programming at 10:45. Members content? Agreed? Okay, thanks for that. A few other chairperson's business items then, members. We'll discuss it later in forward work programming as well, but we had a very useful, very challenging informal meeting with Dyslexia Awareness NI yesterday, and the witnesses from Dyslexia Awareness NI gave some powerful testimony in relation to the extent of under provision and support for children with dyslexia in Northern Ireland. It was a challenging listen, and I think the key message was that the system is failing far too many children with dyslexia in Northern Ireland at this time. So we'll consider what actions we can take in our forward work programming. Nicola and Justin were in attendance at that informal meeting. Either of you want to say anything at this point?
Yeah, Chair. I think, Chair, it probably merits inclusion on our formal forward work programme because the information they shared with us was so hard-hitting and so frightening. I'm sure with the information part in terms of what children are experiencing and by extension their families, it's just very, very sad, shocking, and shouldn't be happening. I think they deserve merit. Dyslexia awareness deserves merit in terms of our formal meetings going forward. But very, very powerful yesterday from the people who were there at the meeting yesterday. So important session.
I agree. Thanks for that, Justin. Nicola?
Yeah, I agree with you, Chair, and with what Justin said there. It was a really excellent meeting. It really was hard hitting, as you said, and my heart was going out to the three that gave us evidence and kind of explained their own situation and what children with dyslexia are facing. And as I said yesterday, it seems that there could be such easy solutions and simple kind of solutions that will make such a huge difference to their lives, all just again back to kind of early intervention. So I certainly agree with Justin there that we should incorporate that into a forward programme if possible.
Thanks, Nicola. The other item I wanted to raise in chairperson's business is the ongoing concerns and confusion in relation to the changes to pupil self-isolation policy. I think it would be remiss of me not to raise this at some point in our agenda today, and I'm sure members, you're in a similar position to me in that you're receiving significant volumes of correspondence from concerned school leaders, concerned parents with regards to changes to the pupil isolation policy. I know that the Minister for Education and I think the Chief Medical Officer have issued letters to various stakeholders, but I still hold that there is a distinct lack of open public communication in relation to this issue, and some real concern and real confusion regards the contact tracing and pupil isolation policy in our school, which is absolutely critical to the safety of our children and achieving the key aim of having our children in school for as much as time as possible. We've obviously proposed a joint committee session with the Education Committee and the Health Committee, to which we are inviting the Education Minister, the Health Minister, the CMO and the PHA to give them an opportunity to openly, transparently, clearly communicate on these matters and to take legitimate questions from representatives on behalf of those key stakeholders and the public. The clerk can provide us with an update, but it is my understanding, to be fair, that we had hoped to meet yesterday and that the Education Minister and EA were available, and that we, unfortunately, we did not get availability from the CMO and the Health Minister. There may be legitimate reasons for that. What we're seeking is to try and have that meeting now as soon as possible. We'll get an update from the clerk, but we are scheduled to meet with the Education Minister next Wednesday, 22nd of September, I think at approximately 9 to 10:30 a.m. I would suggest that it may merit examining whether that could be used for that joint committee slot, given the urgency and importance of these key issues around contact tracing and pupil isolation. I'll let the clerk give us a bit of an update regards where we're at in terms of our original request, and allow members to respond briefly to this matter as well. Clerk?
So, Chair, I kept members up to date with the events last week as we tried to arrange that meeting. And as you say, we had acceptance from the Education Minister and the Chief Executive of the EA and some supporting officials to attend a lunchtime Tuesday meeting to address the issues. It initially seemed as though the Chief Medical Officer was going to attend alongside, but unfortunately he wasn't able to. By Thursday, things had changed a bit, and the Minister for Health wasn't available to us at all for this week. So the clerk to the Health Committee is chasing it up because the Health Committee also would like to have this joint meeting. And I'll let you know as soon as I hear anything. We did leave the meeting arrangements extant temporarily in case the diaries should change on Monday, but we stood them down then.
Okay.
That didn't happen. So.
Members content with that fairly comprehensive update. I suppose what I'm seeking is your view on whether we propose or present next Wednesday, the 22nd of September, 0900 to 10:30 hours as a one option for this meeting. Obviously, it would be good if it could happen sooner than that. Members, anyone want to come in on that?
I would be content with that, Chair. And just for the record, in around the contact tracing, I mean, I have had information from 4 schools between today, this morning, and yesterday. Schools that have had positive COVID cases in them, and yet there has been no contact tracing done at all by the PHA. Of close contacts with those positive cases. So it's clear, and we've seen it in the media anyway, that the PHA are taking, I suppose the kindest description would be they're taking a very minimalist approach to contacting people who have been in close contact. And we need some explanation around that as to why the PHA aren't doing contact tracing when there are clear cases of COVID in the school. And I mean, the principals that I have been talking to are at a loss as to what they should do, because they see their primary responsibility as the health and safety of the children who are under their care. And it's a difficult situation, which is only going to get worse, according to what we're being told, as the autumn and winter progresses.
Chair, can I
bring in Dan, but just briefly, just momentarily. I agree with that. I'll bring you in a second, Dan. Hold on. I agree with that, Pat. Obviously the close contact criteria, the definition of close contact does appear to have reduced significantly. There may be legitimate reasons for that. They do appear to have been attempted to be communicated by letter, but we need to hear directly, publicly from ministers and chief medical officers, chief scientific officers as to what the evidence for that is. But the problem, as you said, Pat, is even that reduced close contact criteria does not appear to be being contact traced in a timely manner by the PHA. So there are legitimate concerns here. Teachers, school leaders, parents have been contacting us in significant volumes, so we have a responsibility to facilitate clear communication at the very least in this regard. Daniel, you wanted to come in there as well? Anyone else, just raise your hand and draw my attention. Thanks, Daniel.
Sure, entirely agree with Pat's concerns there. Like last week, we had a whole issue with a number of principals saying that they're being absolutely swamped by the pressure of having to contact trace as well as teach and run their school. And then all of a sudden, when this system has changed, and we welcomed the change, when this was changed, now we have known. So we went from one extreme to the absolute other end of that scale. And what we're having is quite a lot of parents and teachers and principals that are very concerned and anxious in relation to it. That is why specifically in the Assembly, a number of members of this particular committee at the recall petition asked for specific details in relation to what the core function of the PHA is going to be in relation to contact tracing in schools. There was no great detail in it, just simply that the PHA are going to do contact tracing in schools. So we need to get to the bottom of what that looks like or what their intentions were. But certainly the situation as it sits, going from one extreme to the other, one extreme being the school being under immense pressure, to the other now being put under further pressure because of the failures of the PHA to properly track and trace. So, you know, they haven't actually alleviated any of the concern or anxiety in schools. It has worsened it, if anything, and it's going to get worse.
And I think that's important why we have the joint session that includes the Health Minister and the CMO. A lot of these issues are health related. And whilst it's regrettable it required an Assembly recall, I found some of the information that the Education Minister was able to provide at that recall at least of some help. And as I said, the Education Minister had made herself available again this week. Hopefully that will be possible to get everyone that we need into a room as soon as possible as well. But I think the key issue here is communication and also addressing this tracing and isolation system. Robbie, you want to come in as well there? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Yep, I can't disagree with the need for the meeting and clarity would be good for everybody. And I think, you know, last week's debate was an example of the different levels of information, misinformation and fear. And then the changeover in the process obviously has some issues. But to be fair, there's a couple of things I'd like to clarify. I mean, the PHA have contact, I think the figures are certainly in around, they've been working in a couple of thousand, I think, since it started. I think they have been doing contact tracing. Whether or not it has covered all the bases that need to be covered needs to be addressed. But to suggest that they're not doing contact tracing is inaccurate, for sure. And the confidence building needs to happen. So there was I think you've alluded to it, there was an information letter went out yesterday. I had to read at it this morning with regard, and it gives sort of a high level idea of how to go about contact tracing, and they're applying the same manner of contact tracing that they do in England, Scotland and Wales. And I think what might be useful for us to ask is to find out how successful that contact tracing methodology has been in England, Scotland and Wales when we went to the lengths of welcoming, you know, that alignment last week. I think that would be useful. Then we could compare apples and apples. I've had some principals and school leaders reaching in and saying that they are concerned and they are fearful, but similarly I've had other teachers and principals reaching in and saying things seem to be working for them. So the scheme's been running since last Friday. Pupil and teacher safety has to be our priority. We need to be, I think, we need to be on this, but we need to be ensuring we're talking about absolute facts too.
Yeah, no, obviously contact tracing is happening in some way for schools. The concern is the extent of the correspondence I'm receiving that it's not happening in a timely manner, and for some schools that feels long enough that it's not happening at all, and school leaders, despite change to the PHA, are having to step in given the length of time it is taking the PHA to respond. Now that might be an issue of resourcing, but those are the questions that committees need to be asking and getting transparent answers to. That's why I think the joint session is so important. Thanks, Robbie. Justin, and then we'll try and move this on here.
Yeah, just very briefly, we spoke last week about the administrative burden or the administrative overload on principals and school leaders. EA Health and Safety have confirmed that an accident report form has to be sent to EA for anyone that a principal thinks may have contracted COVID within the school, in particular any adults who may have health implications down the line. So it's up to the principal to decide whether that case has been transmitted within the school, which I don't really think is fair or reasonable. So principals, on top of everything else, are supposed to be expected to be medical practitioners. Clarity is needed there very, very promptly. I agree fully with the points made by Robbie and Pat. So thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Justin. Harry, and then I'll definitely try to move us on here. Thanks, Harry.
Yep, I'll just be brief, Chair. And I think what points, yes, he's all made great, but Robbie's point to see how other areas are progressing and coping, the change was definitely to improve, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. And
yeah, thanks for that, Harry. And I think in terms of comparators, we're looking to see the outcomes achieved by this approach to test, trace and isolate compared to the previous approach as well. Like I've emphasised, the key aim here is safety and having our children in school. I think everyone agrees on that, but it's legitimate and correct that the committees serve their function of getting as much clear information as we can and ask legitimate questions to assess the effectiveness of those policies. So hopefully Clark will hear back in terms of when that joint session can take place as soon as possible. But I think members agree that should we need to allocate the hour and a half that we had set aside with the Education Minister next Wednesday to this joint session, that it's of adequate importance that would be an option for you. Members content?
Well, Chair, just a further suggestion, maybe in light of all the attention to this particular issue and the concerns that have been raised by school, given that the PHA is under the remit of the Minister for Health, is it appropriate that we request his attendance at this committee to discuss what he believes should be in place and how we can best safeguard our children in schools?
Yep, that's the nature of the invitation, Daniel. So it's Education Minister, Health Minister, CMO and PHA. All right. Okay, thanks, members. Clark, content with those items? Yep.
Yes, thanks, Chair.
That's great. Okay, members, I'll move us to agenda item 3 then, draft minutes. Can I refer you to draft minutes of the committee meeting of the 8th of September at page 6 and seek your agreement that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings. Agreed?
Great.
Thank you. There are no matters arising, which moves us to agenda item 5, our session with the Eating Disorders Association Northern Ireland on eating disorders in the school community. Can I ask Assembly Broadcasting to remove all members from the spotlight and to add our witness? Can I refer members to a cover note from the committee clerk at page 28 and an Assembly research paper on eating disorders in Northern Ireland at page 30? And can I give a very warm welcome then to Shan Ogle, the project worker at Eating Disorders Association Northern Ireland. You're very welcome, Shan. We're really grateful for your time with us this morning and look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thanks very much for having me. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah. We can indeed. Thank you.
100%. So my name is Shan, and as she said, I am a project worker for the Eating Disorders Association. So the Eating Disorders Association is a charity that is based in Belfast City Centre, although we cover the entire region, and we are a peer support based organisation offering a range of services for people who are affected by eating disorders and their loved ones. If we could flick to the next wee slide there. Super, thanks. So at the moment, our services come under 3 categories: emotional support, our training and prevention workshops, and our advocacy and campaigning work. In terms of emotional support, we offer a helpline, one-to-one support calls or emails, and we have our online support groups that run weekly, with one week being dedicated to people that are dealing with anorexia, bulimia type symptoms, and then the following week is for people who are dealing with more binge eating or binge eating disorder type symptoms. All our emotional support referral services are free to use, and we have next to no waiting list. We would normally speak to someone within a few days of them being in contact, which is great. We deliver bespoke evidence-based psychoeducational training programs on eating disorders and disordered eating for all different types of organisations. And we also deliver developmentally appropriate prevention workshops for children and young people. And these workshops have been carried out in schools, in youth groups and in sports clubs as well. So both of those packages have been co-produced by and co-delivered with our volunteer ambassador team, who all have lived experience of eating disorders in one way or another. And lastly, we carry out advocacy and campaigning work to try and improve the eating disorder service here in Northern Ireland. We're a member of the REDNIC group in the Public Health Agency, the Eating Disorder Forum of Northern Ireland, and I also sit as the Northern Ireland rep to the Regional Eating Disorder Charity Alliance and Network, which is a UK-wide group of smaller regional eating disorder charities that aim to share best practice and shape policy. So we work with government bodies and the Department of Health and those in politics like yourselves to try and improve services here. So if we could move on to the next wee slide there. So that's our service, and I'm aware that the committee is particularly interested in the experience of those school-aged children, how lockdown has impacted their mental health, and how we think that services could be improved for them. So just to give you a bit of context of what we're dealing with, in terms of numbers, last month 23% of our emails were about children under the age of 18. Usually it's parents getting in touch to discuss their children, but sometimes we actually have the children reaching out themselves. And the age of the children contacting us is much lower than we previously experienced, several children as young as 13, 14. The most common presentation we're seeing is anorexia-type symptoms. However, since the beginning of summer 2021, we have seen an increase in children contacting us who are experiencing other eating disorders like bulimia, binge eating disorder, OSFED or ARFID. And the people that are contacting us at the moment are a lot more unwell than we have previously experienced. Some common themes in our conversations with children and young people include dealing with stressful life transitions, for example, starting a new college or a new school, or being in and out of school with lockdowns or being unwell, feeling frustrated and isolated by a lack of understanding of eating disorders from maybe their family or their peers. A lot are having poor experiences and feeling dismissed by professionals, especially the children with binge eating disorder or ARFID. And this means that those really vital early intervention opportunities are being missed. I completely recognise that we may get more of these cases because often young people contact us if they've had that negative experience, and those with good experiences may just proceed with the service that they've got. Some are worried about the future on both a macro level and a micro level, you know, how they're going to afford things to climate change. And I get there is a sense of nihilism among some of the young people that call us, especially those that have been through the system or have been knocked back from the system in some way. Many struggle to label, integrate and regulate their emotions. And there is also that undercurrent there of adverse childhood experiences or trauma. So if we could move on to the slide 4 there. Thank you. So how has the pandemic had specific effects on children developing eating disorders? For us, the pandemic has meant that more children are being exposed to known eating disorder risk factors than there would have been before. We've found that the children and young people that we speak to don't really tend to mention lockdowns or the pandemic directly, but they tend to talk about the specific risk factors that have either occurred for the first time or gotten worse because of the pandemic. So some eating disorder risk factors that will have affected a lot of children as a result of the pandemic and lockdowns include those stressful life transitions, a lack of social support, and very possibly facing those traumatic events and bereavement and all that sort of thing. Additionally, the pressure on services has reduced access to a system that already struggled to meet demand, and many people had no access to appropriate healthcare. We have heard of a case where a child that was deemed an emergency was told they had to wait 26 weeks before they would be seen. Early intervention is so important to eating disorder recovery, so that's not what we want to hear. And slide 5. So this leads us nicely onto the main concerns that we have about children in relation to eating disorders and how we think that the services could be improved for them. So I could talk about this all day, but just touching on the main points that the kids themselves have made, we need to be better at early intervention. I understand there is talk of a workforce review in the mental health strategy, which is something that I would welcome, and I would hope that this would lead to increased capacity. We could also provide some sort of primary care for people within maybe like the talk and therapy hubs that are also discussed in the mental health strategy. And improving awareness would help everyone recognise those early signs of an eating disorder, which leads us on to concern number 2 and our next slide. Thank you. That there is this lack of awareness, understanding, and consequently social support for children with eating disorders. And this particularly affects boys. I would say 1 in 5 of our calls from children are from boys. Racial minorities, LGBTQ+ people, and those with disabilities, just to name a few. Some suggestions we have to tackle this include possibly a public health awareness campaign, providing more clinical experience in eating disorders for trainee health professionals, and sustainably funding those psychoeducational training and prevention workshops. We do receive a small amount of funding from the department, which we're immensely grateful for, but most of our staff work part-time and are on those temporary grant fundings. We're a really small organisation. There's currently 3 of us, so we have more training requests than we have capacity for, and we always prioritise our support work. So it would be great if we were able to have someone whose sole role was to facilitate training, or if the Department of Health or Education contracted that out in some fashion, because there really is a large need and demand for that service. And then the last slide there. And lastly, we're really concerned about the inflexibility of the system, the silos that are present, and the people that are falling then in between those cracks. We'd like to see more flexibility and choice that empowers people in their recovery rather than forcing them to be compliant. We'd like to see improved transitions from CAMHS to adult services and between trusts. And lastly, we'd like to see better services for children with autism and ADHD, because we're actually seeing young people who are not getting the help to manage their autism or ADHD symptoms, who are then going on to develop eating disorders as they struggle to cope without the appropriate support. And that is us. And just our last slide there is our contact information if anybody wanted to get in touch. And I really appreciate the opportunity to speak today. It's great to see people taking an interest in eating disorders.
Thank you, Shannon. Thanks so much for your presentation, for all the work that you're doing in this important area. I'll be glad to bring members in for some questions to try to draw out the issues a bit further and to see what action we can take, if any, to support your work. You touched on it a couple of times, but are there particular gender or age profile relevance in relation to eating disorder in school-age children?
To be honest with you, Chris, I would say that it is a pretty mixed bag. We would normally see a ratio of 1 boy to 4 girls, but we're increasingly seeing young boys. And again, it's the severity of the illness that we're seeing in children so young that we wouldn't have seen before. Generally, the children are from all different types of backgrounds, they're from all different schools and all different ages. So it really does seem to be a broad mix.
Okay. And in terms of the prevalence and the severity of the conditions, can you tell us a bit about that, how prevalent it is, how severe some of the conditions are?
Yeah, so I can tell you just in terms of our own numbers, I know that we had 2,000 support requests last year. Northern Ireland's prevalence figures for eating disorders, the actual data is very loose on the ground. And the reason for that is that the data only captures people that are within the trust's care system. They don't capture people at a primary care level. And one thing I would be really passionate about is trying to improve our actual understanding of how many people are unwell. Because I can tell you who reaches out to us, but that's obviously, only the tip of the iceberg of who is actually out there. So we can go through the assembly questions and find out how many were in the trusts, but we have no idea how many people are reaching out to GPs. But I would say it's a significant amount if we're getting 2,000 support requests in a year.
Maybe that's something we can work with you on to try and ensure that data does get enhanced. And in terms of causes, then obviously you touched on some of those as well, but would research suggest that self-esteem, cultural pressure, bullying are some of the causes and factors in the disorders?
Absolutely. It's one of those things where there isn't one causal factor. As you mentioned, it is a multitude of different things, and we would agree with the biopsychosocial model of eating disorder cause, where there is those biological factors, maybe increased risk when someone in the family has had mental illness, the social factors of self-esteem, lack of support, all those things, and then the cultural factors of the emphasis that we put on weight, the morality that we attach to weight, particularly with media and all those sorts of things. So it is a myriad of factors. And I'm sure, as you can understand, there's a lot of those things around trauma, around social support, bullying, loneliness, that have no doubt all got worse in the pandemic. And those are the things that we hear when people are calling us.
Quite easy for an education committee member like ourselves to think this is a health issue, but when we consider some of those impacts and causes, particularly in relation to bullying, obviously there are significant responsibilities there for the Department of Education in relation to anti-bullying, particularly around self-esteem and body image and collective responsibilities for us all to make sure that people don't experience those causal factors and that they get the support that they need to combat them. The Assembly Research Services provided us with a research paper in relation to today, so perhaps we could share that with you as well and maybe hone in on some of those questions and actions that we could take to help support the excellent work that you're doing, Shan.
That would be super, thank you.
Thanks very much, Shan. Can I bring in Deputy Chairperson Pat Sheehan, MLA, please? Thanks.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Shan, for your presentation. This committee has actually devoted quite a significant amount of time to looking at emotional health and well-being issues. And indeed, when Siobhan O'Neill, the mental health champion, was in a few months back, she agreed with my assessment that there was going to be a tsunami of emotional and well-being issues coming out of this pandemic and the lockdown and so on. And although you mentioned during your presentation that young people who contacted your organisation didn't actually reference the lockdown or the pandemic as being, the cause of their eating disorder, it certainly, in my view, would probably be the backcloth in a lot of these situations. And what would your own assessment be of all of that?
Yeah, no, I agree with you there, Pat. I would say in reference to that, the children themselves maybe aren't able or don't tie it back and don't come and speak to me and say, oh, I'm feeling this way because I was locked down for 6 weeks. What they will say is, I feel this way because I have been unable to see anyone. And, they actually name the specific factors in their environment rather than and the lack of social support, all those things that we know are more prevalent because of the pandemic. And they do mention those factors. So I would say indirectly, yes, I definitely agree with you, and that's what I'm hearing on the ground.
And do you expect the situation to continue to deteriorate over the next period ahead? I mean, we're being warned now that things are going to get worse over the autumn and winter, in terms of this pandemic. And I mean, here the British Prime Minister out yesterday warning of the potential for more lockdowns in the future, just as everybody thought we were coming out of lockdowns completely. And do you expect that then to throw up further problems and difficulties in terms of emotional health and well-being for young people?
Yeah, I think that I have concerns on multiple levels. I think the primary one that I think about is obviously the strain on services was already there before the pandemic. And now with so many more young people becoming unwell and more people being exposed to these risk factors, we're just adding more and more and more onto a longer waiting list. For example, that per child that I mentioned that's having to wait 26 weeks for an emergency case. With all due respect, a child with anorexia could be dead within 26 weeks. So that is really, really concerning for me. The other things that I would be concerned about then is, the more we're kind of in and out of lockdowns, which I completely support. It does create those stressful life transitions for children that are maybe in and out of school, mum and dad are in and out of work. All those kind of like life upsets obviously then increase the risk for us. Now, I can tell you, based on our figures, that our calls and our support requests have remained constant from July of 2020 to July of 2021. We're seeing that similar level. Now, it goes up and down month by month, but we have seen a pretty consistent level of need throughout the pandemic. So we haven't seen any lull, that's for sure, and I would expect that to continue.
Okay, thanks for that, Sean. And just, you referenced also in your presentation that your organisation is a charity, but do you receive any support from either the Education Department or the Health Department?
Yeah, we do. We're very fortunate to have a small grant from the Department of Health, and I think there's one from the Health and Social Care Board as well, though I'm not sure if those are maybe going to amalgamate in the future. And then my personal position is funded through Halifax funding for a number of years, but that's all we have at the minute, which we're very grateful for.
Oh, absolutely. And it's good that you do get that support. But I'm just wondering, you've said your organisation consists of 3 people. Do you feel you have sufficient capacity as it stands to deal with all the contacts that you're receiving?
I could have another 5 people and I think I'd still have work enough for everybody. You know, we definitely are under significant pressure, and what we find is we often have to prioritise the work that we're doing. So I will always prioritise speaking to people and supporting people, because that's the primary aim of our organisation, which has meant then that our training and our prevention workshops, which ultimately, you know, early intervention and prevention is where I would like to focus a lot of my time. But a lot of the time that gets deprioritised just because of the fact that there's 3 of us and there's all these support requests coming in, which we must prioritise. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for that, Sean. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Pat. Can I bring in Diane Dodds, MLA, please? Thanks.
Hi everyone, and good morning, Sean, and thank you for the presentation. Sort of your last comments leads very well into the question that I wanted to ask. Teachers and school leaders are often, they spend enormous amount of times with young people. They see them every day. What's your assessment of how teachers are trained, have knowledge of these kind of issues, so that if they are concerned, they would have a route or a way of taking it forward?
I would say that I'd like to start by saying there are many teachers, pastoral care heads in particular, that are amazing. And I've had a number of calls from pastoral care heads who you can just tell how much they care about their young people. I've also found that when I've been doing the training with organisations and charities and different schools, because I would sometimes help out with safeguarding training, that there is a general lack of understanding amongst many about what eating disorders actually are, you know, as a coping mechanism for these difficult emotions. And I think that increase in understanding would really benefit pupils, and I would love to work more with teachers and maybe perhaps in the likes of our teaching colleges to really integrate that learning and so that they feel prepared. I think a lot of the teachers that I speak to lack confidence in being able to deal with eating disorders because they're so worried about saying the wrong thing and possibly making someone worse, which I completely understand, and we would love to be able to support teachers to develop that skill.
Thank you. Just on the same theme, I mean, I recognise that teachers care a lot about their pupils and will try to help wherever possible. Is there anything that you would recommend that this committee do, ask for, campaign for, that would improve the ability of teachers to recognise a problem and have a clear route to dealing with that problem? Because I think that would help young people, but I think it would also help teachers who are maybe anxious about a pupil or young person, and having clear pathways and understanding of how to do something is massively important. So what's your recommendations on that one?
Certainly, I think that including a degree of eating disorder awareness training, either at the stage of someone training to become a teacher or routinely, which I personally think would be great, maybe every so many years. Certainly what I'm already doing as part of that safeguarding training, or something there that all teachers have a basic understanding of eating disorders across the board. Certainly, in terms of pathways, what we would often discuss is the need for proper safeguarding and safeguarding policies and approaches for teachers, because it can be a safeguarding issue at times. And most of the time, teachers will have that end of things covered and well resourced and all that sort of thing. I think the only route for eating disorder support at the moment is either through ourselves or through the trusts or through the services. So certainly I would be more than happy for the committee to, reference teachers to come and speak to us, and we are more than happy to take those calls. But I really think that what could really help everybody is actually improving the services, so that young people aren't sitting for months and months and months and teachers don't know what to do, because effectively this young person's in limbo, and there is a limit to what they can do other than just be emotionally supportive themselves, which we would love to help with. Thanks.
Thanks, Diane. Can I bring in Daniel McCrossan, MLA, please? Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation. You raised a concern about a lack of early intervention. Can I ask you a number of points in relation to that? Why do we not have the capacity to intervene early, being the first? Secondly, what are the consequences of a lack of early intervention, and how could this be fixed, and at what cost?
The big word being cost there. So in terms of early intervention, one of the big things is eating disorders are a very secretive illness. And part of that is because of the shame and stigma that is still attached to eating disorders. And I think that a large part of, raising awareness would be tackling the myths and misconceptions around that, because those myths and misconceptions directly lead to people not going to receive help and things getting to a crisis point. So tackling stigma is a big one. Another one is ensuring that medical doctors and GPs have the appropriate knowledge and training about eating disorders. I think it's for the rest of the UK, it's 1.8 hours of a foundation doctor's training is dedicated towards all eating disorders, which we don't think is enough. And I know that we would work with BEAT across in the UK to try and increase the training, and we're working with Queen's to try and increase that training for health professionals, which I know I mentioned in my presentation, to try and get in there earlier and recognise those signs earlier. The other things about early intervention then is mostly, the importance of it really is that every research, the article that's been done indicates that the earlier you intervene, the less chance someone has of becoming really unwell or chronically unwell. If you can get in and provide someone with appropriate eating disorder specific support early on, because it's a highly complex psychiatric illness that does require specialist treatment. If you can get in there early on, the chances of someone being very unwell for a long time are much, much lower. So that's why we prioritise it so much.
Thank you. Further question is, do you believe there's a skill gap amongst professionals who support children with eating disorders? And which professional groups could benefit most from upskilling in that regard?
Yeah, massively so. And I think this is what I was thinking about when I touched on the how much we welcome the workforce review that is proposed in the mental health strategy, because we know that there is a skills gap here. And indeed, Northern Ireland doesn't have an inpatient centre for children or anybody with an eating disorder. Anybody that becomes very unwell is sent across to the UK. And I think that the workforce review would highlight the need for appropriate eating disorder specialists, and often we have to bring people over from England, Scotland, Wales. I think that the area that requires the most development, and I have seen some moves towards this, but I think I would like to see more, is the area of therapeutic interventions. So, eating disorders are fundamentally a mental illness. I certainly welcome the intervention from dietitians, occupational therapists, and social workers. And I actually think that, whilst those numbers, are low, it's not quite as bad as the likes of clinical psychologists, CBT therapists, or things like that. I'm absolutely happy to disclose that we're a peer-based organisation. I've had eating disorders myself. I went through the service and I didn't get any therapeutic intervention from a clinical psychologist or a CBT practitioner the entire time I was in the services. There is a dire need for therapeutic intervention for what is a very distressing mental illness.
But just in relation to that, have we the experts here who can upskill those professionals who have a remit to help children with eating disorders? Have we sufficient people here to help upskill those people?
I think it's a matter, I think that's something that would need to be identified in the workforce review. From what I have heard on the ground, it's a matter of eating disorders, because there isn't as much of a developed service there as there is in other areas, and I could be wrong in this, but this has been my understanding. Because it's not as developed, there isn't the same levels of career progression prospects for people. So often there is that, someone will come in to take a band 6 post maybe and then move back out. So I think that it's maybe not the case of reskilling people that are already there, but for the people that are coming up, developing the facilities and the funds for those people to want to develop a skill set in eating disorder work would be my understanding. But again, would like to see the outcome of a proper review would be great.
That's great. Thank you very much. That's helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Can I bring in Robbie Butler, MLA, please? Thanks. Robbie, think you're on mute, sorry.
Yeah. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for your presentation, Shan, and thanks for sharing there just when you were speaking to Daniel about your own sort of journey too. And if I could start there, if that's okay, so I'll give you 2 questions in one, so I'm not repeating. So in the first instance, where do you see peer support and that peer advocacy coming in? Because I know you talked a little bit about the need for that specialist intervention, which I'm sure we'll all agree with, but I also know that when we're talking about mental health services, the value of peer advocacy and peer support is almost invaluable. And also, could you give us a wee bit more information about the life impacts of untreated or undiagnosed eating disorders and how that, I know a little bit about it, but I want you to talk it out and let people understand what the impacts on people's lives actually are if we don't do something about this.
Yeah, 100%. And thanks very much for your questions. I think that peer support has an invaluable role in supporting people with mental illness at large, but particularly for eating disorders, because it's such an isolating and secretive illness. And often when we speak to people down the phone, and we don't disclose ourselves, but they know that it's a peer support agency. And just knowing that, I think there is a level of trust that people place in you, because they know that you get it, they know that you've lived through it, and they know that they don't often have to worry about being maybe misunderstood or misconstrued in any way. And I think that often people just want to be understood a lot of the time, or feel heard, and that's a significant part of our work. So I would say, now I don't think that peer support, and I'm sure this is not a replacement, and I would certainly advocate for working alongside the eating disorder team. My absolute dream is I would love to see those peer support workers who are eating disorder, lived experience people, working alongside and helping people that are psychiatrists, clinical psychologists, and just adding to that skills mix. In terms of my own life experience, I cost the NHS a lot of money because of my previous eating disorder. My personal circumstances was I had ME, or chronic fatigue syndrome, for which there is no service for in Northern Ireland. The lack of support for my ME and the fact that I was basically left to educate myself meant that I developed binge eating disorder. That wasn't caught, which meant that I developed bulimia. And from bulimia, which also wasn't caught, I went on to develop anorexia. All of those things have had massive impacts on my health. I have osteoporosis. I have a damaged heart. I have ongoing issues with my health outside of that as well. And in terms of my career, I graduated later in life. I finished GCSEs later in life. And as I said, I probably cost the NHS a lot of money. So it really is both a moral duty to try and intervene early, in my opinion, and also a cost-effective one. You know, if someone had have been able to catch things earlier for me, it would have saved a lot of money for services as well. So I think that those are definitely things that I preach about a lot when I talk to people about the importance of early intervention based on my own experience. Yeah.
Thank you, Sian. Chair, can I just ask, I missed a little bit of what Sian said, just some of it. I got 90% of it, but I don't know if anybody else is experiencing any difficulties here with things freezing and stuff. I'm just putting a marker down just for maybe the clerk to look into that, because it's been raised a number of times with me in the last couple of weeks. But Sian, thank you so much. I think it's really important that people are aware of not even just the moment that people are living through, but the actual life impacts and what happens in terms of your health, employment opportunities, relational things. And you said it's a very secretive thing that the problem that people live with, and therefore you're kind of hidden. I was interested then in the breakdown, and you'd said that it's 1 in 5 will be a boy or a male that will report.
Yeah.
Do you think that's an accurate statement of reality, or because boys are traditionally less likely to talk the problems out, do you think that might be slightly different to what we were saying there?
100%. I think the situation with men and boys is a lot more severe than we have a good understanding of. And I think that we talk about eating disorders and disordered eating as being a spectrum. So with clinical eating disorders being at the maybe more severe end of the spectrum and going right down that line to disordered eating. And I think a lot of men kind of hover in that line and don't actually think of their behaviours as maybe an eating disorder or disordered eating. They'll tend to say things, like, oh, sure, I only do that to make weight for my box, or sure, I only do that. There's an awful lot of societal rationalization that would come out of when you're speaking to men. And I definitely think the stigma affects men particularly badly. And we really, really do try our best to try and reach out to men and try and make our service as gender inclusive as possible for all people. But certainly I would agree, and certainly any research by BEAT or any of the main organisations or Bodywise down south would agree with me in saying that we are massively underestimating the amount of men that are struggling. And there is more men that we would find would come just in our own service. This is our perspective. We find that more men come forward to us about binge eating disorder, but also we are seeing an increasing number of young boys coming through with anorexia. There's a couple that I'm supporting at the minute. So there is more under there than I think that is realised for sure.
Brilliant. And my final question then is, it's not a question actually, Sian, because I really enjoyed your presentation, but obviously the voice of young people is really important in terms of what you're doing, and sometimes coming to us is brilliant because we'll be able to push something in the educative piece in particular, particularly in around prevention and awareness. But there are two groups that are fabulous maybe for you to tap into in terms of young people and for that awareness. And one of them is Pure Mental NI. They're incredibly engaged, but they're a great platform to work with, and also Secondary Students' Union of Northern Ireland. I think they have 25,000 members. So in terms of that identification of people that are hidden and maybe just raising that awareness in the meantime, I just want to thank you for your presentation, and I'm sure we'll do what we can as a committee to assist. Thank you, Chair.
Super, thank you.
Thanks, Robbie. Thanks, Sian. And as Robbie said, Sian, thank you so much for that brave and powerful testimony from yourself. And that testimony, the work that you're doing, if the health service listened to you, could save the health service a lot of money. So that hopefully that will be the case. Can I bring in Nicola Brogan, MLA, please? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Sian. I'm really glad you have had the opportunity to present. just to present to the committee. Actually, I think it's such an important issue and something that could be overlooked. With all that's going on at the minute with the pandemic, it would be quite easy to overlook it, but it's such an important issue. So I'm really glad that you have had the opportunity to present to committee, and I echo what Chris and Robbie have both said. Thanks so much for sharing your own personal experiences with it, and especially highlighting there the kind of long-lasting effects an eating disorder can have. It really brings it home to everybody, so thank you for sharing that there. I suppose from the committee side of things, I was interested in what teachers could bring to the table as well. And I know you touched upon it there when you were speaking to Diane, but I do think that teacher training could be a really good way of, I suppose, bringing in some sort of early intervention for young people who suffer with eating disorders. So can you be a bit more specific maybe with what kind of teacher training you think would be beneficial for teachers and for teaching staff, like classroom assistants?
No problem at all. Thanks for your question. I would say that maybe I'm a little biased in saying that I think that the things that we deliver in our, in our psychoeducational training would be very beneficial. And I've delivered these workshops to teachers, and I've certainly had positive feedback about them. So the main things that teachers come to us and ask about specifically are how to support someone, things to say, things to not say, what is the care pathway for eating disorders in Northern Ireland, what is this young person actually going through. A lot of the time the eating disorders people deal with aren't always, anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder. There is other specified feeding and eating disorder, there is ARFID, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, and a lot of the time these are sort of more less unknown eating disorders. People don't understand what the person's going through. So I think that big mix, and then we also touch on safeguarding issues as well, when to call parents or what we would say about safeguarding and things like that. So I think those are some key areas that certainly, based on what teachers come and ask me, I would say would be helpful.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, Shan. And I can just imagine anybody really not knowing what to say or afraid of maybe inflicting more shame on the child and afraid of the consequences of that there. The other thing I wanted to ask you about was about social media. Do you think social media has a big influence around eating disorders, I suppose, around body image? And if that's the case, do you think is there scope to address these issues through an e-safety strategy?
Yeah, I would definitely think that social media, in my opinion, does have a big effect on young people. You're effectively creating a value or a numbered value on attractiveness for young people. How many likes you get, how many whatever. And often that is a very specific kind of attractiveness. And certainly it is something that we would hear young people talk about is the pressures of, or the anxieties that are created by social media. And body image, we know, is one of those things that a poor body image, low self-esteem are both linked to eating disorder risk. So those are definitely things that we touch on in our prevention programs. I do think social media is a problem. I think where I sometimes feel conflicted then is what we do about that. So social media is going to be here to stay, I suppose, is my view on it. And I think that the best approach that I have come up with so far is trying to get those children to have as much media literacy skills as possible. And part of our prevention programs is going through, and one thing that I personally have found incredibly helpful, and I know that other people have as well, is just actually realizing how much effort goes into maybe producing that wonderful, perfect picture that someone has put up. How long have they spent setting up a lighting and editing that picture and putting their plant up in the background, and the actual effort to achieve that makes it seem more unrealistic to young people, or producing film and media content itself and realizing that you have to set cameras in a certain way and all that sort of stuff, I've actually found has been really beneficial for young people.
Yeah, I suppose is that back to that old what you see versus reality, and I think if we could explain that to younger people so that they're all very aware of that, there would be it would be good on a wide range of issues. But Shan, listen, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming here today. I really enjoyed that there, so thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much indeed, Nicola. Appreciate that. Can I bring in Justin McNulty, MLA, please? Thank you.
Hi, Sean. How are you? Thank you very much for your evidence. Very, very powerful evidence session today, Sean. I want to say well done. I want to say you're a powerful, positive example of somebody who's come through this complex psychological illness and traumatic illness, and you've come out the other end, and you've come out shining. You've bounced back. You're thriving and you're blossoming, and you're a brilliant example to young people of how you can come come out the other end. So well done. I want to say be very, very proud of what a powerful and strong advocate you are for children and young people and people in general suffering from this illness. And well done on what you're doing, because you're literally saving lives, and you're very articulate. You're an authority on this issue, and you're not detached from the issue, which so many experts are. And you've got real powerful credibility. So well done, Sean. I can't overemphasize that enough. Tell me, you mentioned the fact that those who are at the depths of this illness, at the real depths of this illness, have to travel across the water. How many children or young people is that every year?
I don't have that exact figure. I appreciate your kind words there. I really do. It's certainly a long slog, and I really appreciate that, Mr. McNulty. I think that I don't have the exact figure going over to England, but I know it's a non-significant amount. And quite frankly, my personal opinion is that it's immoral for a single child to be sent away from their family, regardless of how many it is. I can certainly try and find that number out and get back to the committee on that. But I don't think that it's moral. I don't think that it's right for parents to have to then fund, flights, boats, hotels, all the costs of going to see a child in treatment. And, often the difficulty is a child that's very unwell in a unit in England or Scotland or Wales. They might not even be pleased to see the parents. They're often very unwell, very angry, very upset that they've been pulled out of their home. And this is such a distressing experience for parents and for families. I know that there has been an options paper created. I don't know if it's in the public domain yet, but I know that it's been written about whether Northern Ireland should have their own inpatient unit for eating disorders, and whether that should be something that is instead more focused out on a community level to stop people becoming so unwell. Certainly, I would not mind what way they ended up doing it, as long as there was some provision for people who required inpatient care here. I know that some people have actually passed away over in the mainland UK. So, to have that for parents, I just think it's horrendously traumatic. And I don't think that it's an appropriate way to care for people in this day and age, for sure.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more, Sean. And to put yourself in the position of a young child or a person, any person who's experiencing this trauma, then to have to travel to the UK for treatment, I think that would only exacerbate that despair in the person almost. Back to what was asked previously. What's the number one ask of us, Sean?
I would say that increase in awareness, whether that be, again, I understand that your sort of priority would be within the school age group, whether that could be through schools campaigns, public health campaigns, teacher training. I am up for whatever if it increases awareness about eating disorders, the signs, and starting to cancel out those myths if possible. And certainly, if the schools could access that appropriate psychoeducational training and those prevention workshops for schools. I mean, I can tell you that I could have a full-time member of staff going to do that training, and I could fill up my calendar from now to Christmas with that training, because there really is a demand out there. It is wanted, and people do want to learn to do better, but it's just the capacity there. So certainly that would be the dream for me, is that increased awareness, the psychoeducational training and prevention, and then again addressing something or having some sort of service for children with autism and ADHD, because I think that's an area that is often really, really overlooked. that there is such a crossover between issues with food and disordered eating and eating disorder and children that have autism and ADHD. And what ends up happening is we'll have calls from parents that have been just passed around the houses of GP to dietitian to mental health practitioner to back to the dietitian to back to the GP and discharged with nothing. So I think some sort of integrated system and greater support for children, if possible, with ADHD and autism would be a big priority for me, yeah.
Do you feel the prevalence of this condition within children with autism and ADHD is greater?
It is absolutely under researched, and to be quite honest, that's both on an academic level and a prevalence level. It's starting to come out now that there are links between autism and anorexia nervosa, and certainly that is something that we would see quite a bit of. And there is also those issues with avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, which is an eating disorder where someone maybe restricts their intake for reasons other than maybe body image, self-esteem. It might be to do with the sensory aspects of food, fear of choking, fear of abdominal pain, and we tend to see that quite a lot in children with autism and ADHD. So I do think that there is those particular needs within that population group, and I would say we vastly underestimate how much people are struggling with that. I know that there is a parent group or a very loose, maybe like WhatsApp, Facebook group of parents in Northern Ireland who are dealing with this issue that are basically supporting each other because they can't access any services.
That's sad.
Very. Yeah, God loves them.
Absolutely. Sean, listen, thank you very much for your evidence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. Can I bring in Harry Harvey, MLA, please? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you, Sean. Just say, first of all, really appreciate what you're doing at present and what you've done. We're not unmindful of what you've been through yourself. At the minute, it is serious concern. There are a lot more unwell, and I think a lot of it boils down to there's an increase of pressure on our youth, but sometimes that's because there's more pressure on the parents, and sometimes at the minute even there's a lot more pressure even on teachers, which we're trying to deal with. A lot of questions have been asked and a lot of mine have been answered, but that's grand. I mean, I think the early intervention one, totally key, and the role that schools and teachers play. I was going to ask about training and advice, but you've that all well answered and covered, which I really appreciate. I was going to ask you maybe, there are several disorders that are outlined. What would be the most common among young people at present? And is it the same for all age groups, or do different forms present more often with younger than older people, Sean? If you can maybe answer me that, thank you.
Yeah, so again, most commonly, I would say about 2/3 of our calls in young people are about anorexia type symptoms. Not everybody has the diagnosis yet because of the access issues, but those type of restrictive eating disorder symptoms. The one that would probably follow that, I would say, in young people is binge eating disorder, which, you know, for the committee to understand isn't just overeating occasionally. As I'm sure you know, it's incredibly distressing and compulsive, and these young people feel like they're unable to stop. They're completely out of control of their food and their weight, and it's almost like a compulsion or an intrusive thought, and it's very distressing for them. I would say about 25% of our calls would be binge eating disorder, and the rest would be, maybe 20% would be bulimia, and the rest would be sort of unspecified, maybe the umbrella term of OSFED or ARFID in maybe about 5% of cases.
Mm-hmm. And while they're all equally important, but the anorexia seems to be the most life-threatening one in the end, doesn't it? Which is
I think they all are, to be honest. You know, I actually, based on my personal testimony, I was initially in hospital because of bulimia, because when you're being sick, you're disturbing the electrolyte imbalances in your body, and that can lead to sudden death. You know, I have friends who personally I know died because of that. And so definitely, and with binge eating disorder disorder, there is those risks then of heart disease, of obesity, of diabetes, which can be in itself lethal. So we try to take the approach of, they are all potentially lethal illnesses. Certainly eating disorders as a general theme are the most highest mortality of any psychiatric illness if you don't include addiction, in which case they're second. So certainly we take the approach of it's crisis levels on all fronts if someone is seriously unwell with any eating disorder, and I think it's the level of unwellness that we try and kind of focus on most of all. Certainly at the moment we are seeing, and I've heard through services, that people with anorexia are being prioritised in terms of the care here because of maybe immediate medical risk and stuff like that. But I also know of people then who are bulimic, who are suicidal, who are self-harming to a degree, and they are being deprioritised. And certainly that's a concern for us, that we are seeing maybe a bit of an inequality even within eating disorders. A final point I'd just like to make is, at the moment, if someone goes to their GP and they go down the eating disorder care pathway, if you're deemed to have anorexia or bulimia, you're referred on to the eating disorder service here. But if you have one of those other eating disorders, like binge eating disorder, OSFED or ARFID, you're actually referred back to general mental health services. And I don't feel that is appropriate, because I don't think that those, it's such a skilled job to try and improve the life of someone with an eating disorder. And certainly I would like to see all eating disorders treated equally within the service. So that's my personal rant for the day.
No, that's much.
Thanks for your question.
No problem. Thank you very much. And I do hope that through the chair, us in the committee here will be of some help to you. And take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Harry. Thanks all members for your questions, and thanks to Shan for your really powerful and informative evidence presented to the committee today. We're really grateful for it. And we'll certainly consider what we can best do to support the work that you're doing to support school-aged children with eating disorders. Thanks so much, Shan.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, could I ask Assembly Broadcasting to remove the witness and to add members back into the spotlight, and ask the clerk to summarise any actions or requests resulting from our briefing. Thanks, Clerk. I think you might be on mute.
Sorry.
Thanks.
Muted, beg your pardon. Okay. So Shan made a call for enhanced baseline data. This is something that the committee has referred to the department in several different areas of policy. So I think that's something that we can start off with. She also replied very centrally about the provision of routine training to teachers as the remedy that she thought might be most helpful in the educational sphere. She noted that the only route available to school-aged children is through her organisation and the trusts. So for teachers, really, the best help would be to improve the services that are available. In terms of services available, then, the fact that there's no inpatient facility in Northern Ireland, consultants arriving from elsewhere, no career progression here in this area, those are systemic issues that are unhelpful. And she also flagged the issue of eating disorders in men and boys being kind of a hidden thing, which they rationalise according to kind of social ideas, and then children with autism and ADHD having a huge crossover with disordered eating, and that hasn't really been a matter of significant research yet. So I think in terms of actions, there are certain points that the committee will want to refer to the Department of Education. We have asked for a Hansard report of today's session, so we can refer the department to that, and also to the research that we had done, if members are agreed, and Shan's presentation. And really, the Health Committee may find that helpful in continuing, its work on services. I think particularly one of the things that stood out was the fact of, how distressing it is for children and then parents to have to go to England or Wales for treatment like this, when it is so crucial to the person's identity, and so upsetting already without having parental or family distance as well. So I think if we refer our material to the Health Committee and also let the Department of Education know what we've received today and what the highlights were, Chair, do you have any additional actions?
I think that's fair enough, Clark. Perhaps we could ask the Department of Education what particular action it is doing to promote anti-bullying, especially in relation to body image and weight, given that appears to be a causal factor for a number of eating disorders. And perhaps we could ask the Health Committee if they would ask the Health Minister for an update in relation to inpatient eating disorder care in Northern Ireland.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly. Robbie also had the idea to refer the material to Pure Mental and Senior Students Union NI, given their outreach function, to help contact young men and inform young men. So we can also do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Members, anyone else want to add any other actions briefly, or content with those?
Content, Chair. It was a good session.
Thank you. Okay, thanks for that, Clark. Okay, members, then we'll move to agenda item 6, our correspondence. Can I refer members to page 49, where we have 10 items of correspondence and a summary note included at page 50. Clark, do you want to speak to the correspondence, please? Thanks.
Sure. Members, item 7.2 on page 52 and item 7.3 on page 56 are correspondence from the Minister of Education and the Minister of Health on the revised arrangements for the identification of close contacts in schools, with the Public Health Agency taking over responsibility for contact tracing. So these were issued to you earlier in the week when they were live issues as well. So members, I think the main action is obviously to seek to explore these with the ministers in the concurrent meeting with the Health Committee, which we're trying to establish. But do you have any other actions that you'd like to take on this?
I think that's fair enough, Clark. I think there is useful information in the letters, but they're not as widely accessible or as publicly communicated as I think that needs to be. I think that's the overriding point here. But helpful information, as you say, that would be useful to discuss at that joint session. Members, content? Okay. Thanks, Clark.
Okay. Item 7.6 on page 69 is an Ulster University report, Northern Ireland Parent Surveys, Experiences of Supporting Children's Home Learning During COVID-19, and a request to share those research findings with the committee. So members, obviously we're going to go into forward work planning just after this, so this is one of the items that you can consider. But maybe you've had a chance to look at the research and can offer some actions now.
Can you reference the page that's at, Aileen?
Sorry, page 69, Chair.
Yeah, I think this is one to discuss probably in the forward work programme if members are content. Yeah, okay. Thanks, Clark.
Great. Okay, thank you, Chair. Item 7.11 on page 130 is correspondence from the Children's Law Centre about a High Court judgment against the South Eastern Health and Social Care Trust in a case for breach of statutory duty, where a disabled child was denied respite when the facility he used was repurposed during the COVID pandemic from a respite facility to a residential facility. So the Children's Law Centre is highlighting the importance of respite care and the need for cross-departmental cooperation on this. Members, I think it might be appropriate to forward this correspondence to the Health Committee, if you're agreed on that.
Yeah, Clark, I think it would be good to forward to the Health Committee and perhaps direct to Department of Health and Minister for Health as well. The key call from the Children's Law Centre here is that swift action be taken to build suitable and adequate respite facilities for vulnerable disabled children, in tandem with addressing the avoidable harms caused to the same protected equality group as a result of restriction and disruption of special educational provision. So we could probably forward that to both the Health Minister and the Education Minister to see what joined up action is being taken further to that judgment. Members content with that, or did someone want to come in there? Yeah, okay. Happy enough, Clark?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Tabled today is a memo from the Royal College of Paediatricians and Child Health on the vaccination of 12 to 15-year-olds. So this is following the JCVI decision that other policy matters could be taken into account in deciding about vaccinating young people. Are members content to note this? I mean, it kind of focuses on consent, really.
What page is this at, Tara?
Sorry, it's in your tabled items, Chair.
Okay. 7.13, is it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, I think vaccination for 12 to 15-year-olds is of significant importance. And I think the joint committee session would give us a really good opportunity to for the ministers, the CMO, to communicate on this and for us to be able to ask questions. So I think we note this statement and we can advise the Royal College that we hope to discuss this at a joint Education and Health Committee session. Members content with that approach? Yeah, okay, thanks, Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Also tabled today then is a letter from the Department about the funding of SCOTENs. So this was funded jointly in the past by the Department of Economy and the Department of Education, and this time round the Department of Education is going to fund it across the board. Are members content to note that correspondence?
Content to note and maybe check with Stranmillis University College that I think was heavily involved in that through Noel that they've received clarity in relation to that. That'd be great. Okay.
And then the final bit, the final letter tabled today, I'm afraid it did come in late yesterday, but Pure Mental were anxious that the committee should see it before the general embargo lifts, and it's a report that they've written about the primary school counselling service. So if members are content to note, again, it's something that you can consider in forward work planning in just a moment.
Okay. Noted. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, and then I see further individual correspondence about concerns regarding that close contact definition as well, which is something that we hope to be able to raise as soon as possible. Okay, Clark. Members content to dispose of the correspondence as per the summary note at page 50 with the above exceptions. Agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed, thank you. Okay, members, before we go into our forward work programme planning in closed session, is there any other business? No? Okay. Can I ask Assembly Broadcasting to move us to closed session and keep all members in the spotlight? Thank you.
Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland